TSMC sends engineers to US plant as Arizona officials reportedly welcome a second fab. This is an innocuous headline. So why am I discussing this? Yeah. Okay, let's talk about this. What is TSMC? Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. This is the world's most valuable semiconductor company. It's one of the world's largest and most important semiconductor foundries. Yeah, its customers are the biggest customers in the world: Apple, AMD, MediaTek, Nvidia, and so on and so forth. That's just like three or four examples. It is the most important, the most valuable semiconductor company in the world. Yeah, it is based in Taiwan. Yes, and let's understand that Taiwan's key industry is the chip making industry, and TSMC is what it is. Yeah, and chip making is a vital component of the US military industrial complex. Chips are at the heart of everything. You have a cell phone, it has a chip. Without the chip, it doesn't work. Your cell phone is a computer. And without the chip at the heart of the computer, your cell phone doesn't work. It's not going to work. You have a laptop, you've got a tablet, you got a car, you got a fridge, you got anything, any electronic device, almost any electronic device. At the heart of these devices, you have chips. Chips are indispensable, and chips are indispensable in cutting edge military technology. Nowadays, you even have smart shells that have chips inside them, and those shells are guided by GPS, those artillery shells. And yeah, so you have chips in everything. You have chips in drones, you have chips in various vehicles, you have chips in ballistic missiles, you got chips everywhere. Without cutting edge uh, chip technology, the world would not work the way it works today. And it's extremely vital and important from a military perspective. So the chip making industry is a vital part of the US military industrial complex. Taiwan is essentially a US protectorate or US vassal, and it's this company TSMC serves the various major US uh, companies like Apple, AMD, and so on and so forth, Nvidia, and so on. So what's happening here? TSMC is sending engineers to the US, to an American US plant in Arizona. Yeah. Top chip contractor TSMC sent 300 engineers and their families to the company's $12 billion plant in Arizona last week as this plant prepares to become operational. Yeah. Uh, TSMC's presence is now being established in the US, and the company seeks to build a second plant in Arizona. The cost of building new fabs in the US would be 50% higher than in Taiwan, but that's not a barrier for the US. The US is perfectly happy with that. Yeah. So, what is happening here? Let's understand what's happening. Recently, I spoke about this a few weeks ago. The Americans have imposed sanctions on China. Yeah. They gave an ultimatum to all of their engineers, the US citizens who are working in China, in the Chinese chip making industry: return to the US or lose your citizenship. So, and they have blocked exports of key components and so on and so forth to China, which is essentially going to cripple China's high end chip making industry. The Chinese will still be able to produce chips and so on, but the cutting edge high end chip making is not going to happen, is no longer going to be possible in China because of this trade embargo and these trade sanctions, which were announced very quietly. So that makes Taiwan even more valuable for China. As we know, the Chinese seek um, to reintegrate Taiwan with China. They view Taiwan as a renegade province. They say that Taiwan is an integral part of China, and they will reunify it, and they do not rule out the use of military force. So the Americans are now slowly setting in motion a process of relocating TSMC to the US. And what they are doing is that the Americans are relocating, airlifting the core of TSMC to China. The most important human resource assets are being moved to the US. So in a few years, the Americans will be able to, manufacture chips, which was that was being outsourced to Taiwan. It will all be relocated to the US. So TSMC will essentially have multiple, possibly, uh, you know, plants in the US, and it will start manufacturing chips in the US. And once this happens, Taiwan is going to become expendable. Taiwan could become worthless in that case. So, in case the Chinese try to invade, the Taiwanese could destroy their TSMC plants, chip making industry, and the Chinese will have a hollow victory because the main prize will not be available, because now it has all been relocated to the US. So, even if the TSMC plants in Taiwan are destroyed, it's not going to affect the US industries and Apple and all that. Yeah, they will be able to keep manufacturing stuff there at a higher price, but that's fine. So Taiwan could, in a few years, become expendable. Taiwan obviously is a strategic asset for the US. It is one of the major choke points in the South China, so-called South China Sea, the Champa Sea. It is part of the first island chain. Let's put that on the screen so that you understand the geography. In case you don't know, I'm sure you do, but let's do it anyway. Here is Taiwan. Here is Taiwan. There you go. That is the island of Taiwan, and this is like an unsinkable aircraft carrier. The US sells arms to Taiwan. The Taiwanese military is quite strong, and even today, the Chinese are not in a position to invade Taiwan possibly successfully, because they would end up facing significant military setbacks. And obviously, the US supplies and uh, bolster the Taiwanese armed forces. And if the Chinese try to invade Taiwan, the Americans would get involved today. But in a few years, when Taiwan becomes expendable, what's going to happen if the Chinese try to invade? Will the US get involved? So, this move to start relocating the key assets of TSMC to the US and start opening TSMC plants in the US, it in a way reminds me of the 1985 Plaza Accord, which I have spoken about the Plaza Accord as well. You can search on this channel. The Plaza Accord in 1985 set in motion a process that led to the permanent decline of the Japanese economy. The Japanese economy is no longer what it used to be. In the 1980s, the Japanese economy was the second largest. It had become the second largest economy in the world. It was potentially going to surpass the US economy and become even larger than the US economy. And then you had the 1985 Plaza Accord, which slowly destroyed the Japanese economy. Yeah. So this move to start relocating and airlifting the core of the TSMC workforce to the US and start opening TSMC plants in the US could be similar to the Plaza Accord of 1985, which destroyed the Japanese economy. So we know that President Mr. Xi Jinping met with the US President Biden in Bali. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago. 15, 16 November was the summit, the G20 summit in Bali. The two leaders met there. I am sure there is some kind of news report. Let us see. Yes, here is a Chinese news report. Let me put that on the screen. 1 second. Here it is. So this is the official Chinese government readout of the meeting. Their report of the meeting. President Xi Jinping meets with US President Joe Biden in Bali. So this meeting, I'm sure there is a US version of this as well and lots of other news reports. I'm just putting this on the screen as a reference. So the two leaders met for over 3 hours, and it is said that they sought to manage the differences between the two nations. Yeah. So I don't know. Obviously, Mr. Biden is no longer very capable of negotiating and all that, but I am sure they had very high-ranking US officials there who negotiated with the Chinese. So what's going on behind the scenes? Like I have said many, many times, diplomacy and negotiations always happen in secret. They always happen behind the scenes. It's only when everything is finalized that something is announced to the public. So what are the two nations discussing and negotiating? The official statement from the US is that the two leaders sought to manage the differences between the two nations. So the question is this: is the United States preparing to eventually cede Taiwan to China? Maybe in a few years, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. maybe 15 years. And is that something that was possibly discussed between the Americans and Xi Jinping's team? Because it's going to be very, very hard for the US to defend Taiwan in the long run. The US is a declining power. The Chinese, I know, we all know that their economy is not doing well anymore, and they're facing significant problems, including the inexplicable COVID lockdowns and so on. But China is still a major economy, and they are investing a huge amount of money in building their naval muscle. The naval strength. They have been churning out warships like sausages. The Chinese. So in the long run, it's going to be extremely hard, almost impossible, for the US to defend Taiwan. Let's say in a 10-year or 20-year horizon, it's going to be almost impossible for the US to defend Taiwan. So is Taiwan obviously is something that the two sides have discussed in the last meeting, 15-16 November, in the meeting that is on the screen. So is the US negotiating with China about when it will be willing to allow China to take over Taiwan? It is a possibility. So before any such thing happens, the Americans will need to relocate all the core TSMC resources to the US, open multiple TSMC plants in the US. So if or when Taiwan is lost, the Americans will be able to continue to have business as usual, and they will not face any problems. So it looks like the Americans are preparing, not today, not next week, not next year, but in a few years, to reconcile themselves with the possibility that Taiwan will be taken over by China. And that is terrible. So who's going to suffer the most? It's going to be the Taiwanese people that suffer the most. The US used Taiwan all this time, and now it will soon become expendable, and they will let it go. And the Taiwanese people will have to deal with it. So that's how the world works. That's how the geopolitics works. There are no friends or enemies in geopolitics. It's all about your national interest. It's all about your self-interest. Everything is motivated by self-interest. So that's what's happening. That's this interesting emerging situation that we are witnessing vis-a-vis Taiwan and TSMC. It looks like in a few years the Americans will be fine with the Chinese taking over Taiwan. So let's see how that goes. Yeah.